Hi there my friends, welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today I'm working gouache on some Strathmore Mixed Media paper. So I'd started off just getting this piece of paper taped down to a board with some acid-free washi tape. Then I transferred my original sketch over onto this piece of paper using a trace down method. It's white graphite trace down paper. I will link it in the description below. And then I got out my Winsor & Newton gouache set, just a simple set of tubes of gouache that I'd pre-squirted into this little holder, and I'd already made a swatch. I do use these quite a lot, so they're well and truly mangled in their little compartments, but they work really well from wet or from dry. They can completely dry out and still be re-wetted and still be very opaque. And as you can see on the right hand side, I've got my little palette with my colours in, and below it is a little tiny mixing palette. It was from Temu, less than £1. And it's just perfect because when I work with gouache, I don't like to work with lots and lots of gouache out. I just like to mix a tiny amount. And the best thing is you can leave gouache on this little palette, or on any palette really. It can dry out and it can always be reactivated. So if you don't use it in one painting, you can use it in your next. So I'm just I do the whole painting process just with one brush, and it's a tiny little brush. It's a golden Taklon brush. I believe it's by Crafter's Companion, which is Royal and Langnickel brand. And yeah, just go through the whole painting with this little brush. I just set the camera up to roll, didn't know whether I was going to be releasing this as a YouTube video or not. I just wanted to see how things played out, because I haven't used gouache on this toned paper before, and gouache in itself is an opaque watercolour, but when you're going over a dark surface such as this, I didn't know how well it was going to handle or cover up the colour, or if the paper would peel or pill. So it was a bit of an experiment, and it turned out really well. I'm really pleased with it. So as you can see, I've put the finished painting to the top left hand side. During the painting process, you will see that image of the finished painting move over to the right, because I don't want it to get in the way. I want you to be able to see everything that I do. So yeah, so I hope everyone's keeping well. So if you're new to the world of gouache, what it is, it's an opaque watercolour, and there's a couple of things that you just need to be aware of when using gouache, and that is the lighter colours dry a bit darker colours will dry a little bit lighter, and it will always stay reactive to water, so you can always reactivate layers. So as you start building up your layers, you've got to be very careful and use a very light hand, that you don't actually just activate the one that you've just put down, the layer that you've just put down. So very light hand throughout this process. Some people like to work with the gouache in a really loose fluid state to begin with, to lay down base layers and then slowly build up thicker layers of gouache on top of that, and generally that prevents the underlying layers from reactivating too much. But because I was working on this paper, it's mixed media paper by Strathmore, as I said, but it's more like the texture of card. It's more like a cardstock texture. It is acid free, so no problems with it there, but I just didn't know how it was going to work, because I didn't know how absorbent it was going to be. So obviously the more absorbent a paper, it's taking the water out of the medium, which allows the medium to dry a lot quicker, and if the water is removed from the pigment quickly, you're less likely to have that layer re-react when you're putting additional layers on top, as long as they're not too watery. So you can work dark to light, and you can work light to dark, and as you will see through this video, I do both. I go backwards and forwards between the two methods. I hope everyone's keeping well. It's Bank Holiday Monday, the sun's shining, and I've just started another watercolour painting, bit of a play session, and while that's drying I thought I'd jump on here and do the voiceover for this one. So they can see going in with some dark, just mixing up a dark purple. You don't need to, if you want to try gouache, you don't need to buy many colours at all because it's very mixable. You can mix just about anything from quite a limited palette, but what you will need is white. Using gouache, you generally do use a lot of white, and I did have it squeezed out into the top left hand corner of the little palette. I used all that white up, and because it kept getting tainted with the other colours, I actually just carry a tube of fresh titanium white or permanent white. And the bigger tubes, Winsor & Newton thankfully carries larger tubes of the white as well, which is great because white is, as I said, something that you will go through quite a bit. If you're unsure what working with gouache would feel like, but you do have watercolour paints, what you can do is just buy a tube of white gouache paint, and then you can mix your watercolours in with it to create different colours, and that way you'll get a feel for what gouache acts like. But yes, I really recommend it. I know there's all sorts of gouache out there, jelly cup gouache and different brands. I have tried some of the cheaper ones such as Reeves and things like that, and there's a cheap one by Dale Around It, and I don't suggest buying those. They're very fluid. So as soon as you squeeze them out, they're really watery, and their opacity is not very good at all. But the Himi gouache, I have 2 sets of the Himi gouache. They're great. That's the jelly cup gouache. I think they go under different names, but it's the little 30ml cups of gouache. They work really well. And if you're not worried about light fast, then they'd be great to use in sketchbooks and things like this. But the Winsor & Newton, their light fast properties are very good, so I've got no qualms about framing this piece and popping it up for sale. In actual fact, this is going to be exhibited in an exhibition coming up in July. So you saw me brush across the paper there. There was just a little insect, like a little thunderbug on the paper, and a couple of times he made his way back and I had to gently brush him off again. I tried blowing him off the paper, but it didn't work. He's obviously got really sticky feet or something because he didn't budge, hence the soft brush method. So this is a longer video. I know I did put out a poll not too long ago asking if people wanted shorter videos that were more sped up, or longer videos, or a mixture of both. Most people voted for a mixture of both, so this is one of the longer ones, and it's running at just under an hour. So taking my time there, nice and fluid movements just to get a nice tight line for the proboscis. I think that's what it's called, the tongue. And I know a lot of people like to use gouache as an underpainting for working coloured pencil on top and pastel pencil on top. One of the great things about gouache is it dries matte. So the animators in times gone by would create animation stills with gouache because it photographed really well because there was no shine. But also currently I've seen a lot of artists use gouache as an underpainting for going on top with things like coloured pencil and pastel pencils, because it does dry with quite a gritty textured surface, so it gives quite a lot of tooth for pencil work, which is good. But this one is all gouache. Building up some texture just on the hairy part of his thorax at the minute. He or she, I'm not sure, but it is, the species is painted lady butterfly. Very pretty butterfly that we get here in the UK. Now I'm just filling in that leg just so I know where it's going, just so when I work on the flower top that I don't lose my positioning for that. And the best thing is, if I do happen to go over any part, because it's an opaque medium, I can come back in and work on top, so just building up the layers. So if I lose a little bit of the leg, that's fine, as long as I've got a rough idea where it is. And when I do trace my sketch over onto a drawing surface or a painting surface, I keep the tracing until the painting is finished, because if I lose a marking, I can always come back on with the tracing and pop the marking or positioning or anything like that back in. But I always sketch on a separate piece of paper and then just transfer the lines I actually want and need over onto a painting surface or drawing surface. As I said, this Strathmore Mixed Media paper is very thick. I'm not quite sure of the weight, but I will link the paper in the description below. It didn't buckle because it's almost like working on a cardstock, and the texture worked brilliantly. Working the butterfly was fine, working the top part of the flower was fine, but when it came to doing the big petals of the flower, that was a little bit more of a struggle, because orange in most mediums, most wet mediums, is very translucent, so trying to get rid of the grey showing through did take quite a bit of work, going backwards and forwards, and I ended up having to build up about 4 layers of white and just an off-white, like a titanium white, sorry, like an unbleached titanium white, to try and build up a thick enough undercoat so the orange would zing. Because if you put orange on this grey, it just looks blur. It just doesn't do anything because it's so transparent. And switching round. Those of you that know me well know that I do tend to move my board around quite a lot. I had shoulder issues many years ago now. I don't ever want that to return, so I like to be nice and comfortable when I'm working and not putting any strain on any of my joints at all, being this is my job. So that the line running down the front there of the butterfly's wing, it is there in real life, but I do tend to lessen the look of it slightly as I progress through the painting, because I didn't want the wing to look like it'd been outlined, even though that is true to life and it does look like that. I think sometimes when we see things in a photo, it looks great because you know that's a photo of something real, so obviously your brain thinks, yep, that's right. But sometimes when you see it in a painting, it can look wrong. So a little bit of artistic license going in there. If there's any mediums or subjects you'd like me to cover on my channel, just pop them in a comment below. Working all different kinds of mediums, acrylics, watercolours, obviously gouache, pastels, graphite and charcoal. I'm going to say oils, but I haven't worked in oils for quite a long time. And that's just really because of the drying time. When you feel the artistic urge, you just want to go and create, not go and create and then have to wait for layers to dry. Gouache dries really quickly. It was quite warm in the studio when I was painting this. I worked on this over 3 days, I think, on and off, and it was quite warm in the studio, but gouache dries quickly anyway. Unless you're somewhere very humid, then it might take a little bit longer, but you can always speed the drying time up with a heat tool or with a hairdryer. So just getting the lights in there so I have something for the darker tones to sit on. Another thing with working on a tinted paper like this one is that it gives you a great mid-ground a mid-tone to work from, so you can work up to your lights and you can work down to your darks as well. So when you're working on white paper, for instance, you can't get any whiter than the white of the paper. And I think sometimes that can throw people, especially if they're beginners, to get their tonal value mapped out. But when you're working on a mid-tone paper, that mid-tone is already there, and it's easy to see how light and how dark you can go as well. Also, if you're working on a paper that you haven't worked on before, maybe it's a different texture or a different colour, or maybe it's a white paper but has a slight tint to it, because not all white papers are really bright white. It is nice to swatch your colours out on the paper you're going to be using, because if I were to swatch these gouache paints out on a white piece of paper, they're obviously not going to show up the same if I'm working on a grey paper with them. They are going to look different. And a lot of mediums where you add water, they look very different between the dry format and the wet format. So it is nice to get a swatch and get an idea of what your colours are going to look like. I've worked with these Winsor & Newton gouache paints for years, so I do know their capabilities. But sometimes, as with the orange petals of the flower, it did throw me for a few minutes, and I had to make another coffee and have a think. That's my excuse for being more caffeinated than normal. So just pop that white in there, and that's so I don't lose that position. If you want anything to remain white and you're working on on a tinted paper, get that white in first, just so you don't lose it. Because if I was to go on there with brown and then apply the white, there might be a tendency of the white picking up some of the brown and reactivating it, and you just end up with a muddy looking white. None of this is left, none of the areas that I paint white is left pure white, because white is reflective in nature. Well, all colours are reflective in nature, but white especially, and black. So they are going to pick up and reflect some of the surrounding colours. So I never leave anything pure white or jet black. And if you're using black, don't use it on its own. Always mix it in with another colour, pop another colour in with it or under it, and it just gives black a little bit more of a depth. Or mix your own black from the colours you're using on your palette, and it looks a little bit more harmonious. This was nice because it was worked with a limited palette. I used probably 5 colours, I think, in all, and just mixing between those colours and obviously using white just ties the whole painting together. Less is more. Just going again down that edge, just tidying the edge up there. And then tiny bit of shading on the edge of the wing. And the sun was beaming through the window now, and I was getting dazzled. Not anymore. I pulled the blind down. I was getting completely dazzled. So what I've done now is I've skipped forward slightly. I've laid a flat wash of orange. I mixed an orange, mixed a lot of white with it, and a little bit of a creamy white that I'd mixed, and then laid that flat down. Now when I go on with this red colour, it doesn't matter if it reactivates the orange a little bit, that's fine, because it'll mix in, give a little bit more of an interest to those areas of the wing. So going round, and I used a very steady hand just to keep the veins of the wings in position, because it's so easy to lose these kind of guidelines when you're working with an opaque medium. Now going in with a little bit of the orange I'd already mixed, but adding a touch of red to it just to darken it slightly. The red is quite translucent as well, so going between the browns that I'd mixed, the orange and the red. And in some areas of the shaded areas where I wanted the veins to look even deeper, I mixed a little bit of a purple as well, using the red that I'm already using and a little bit of ultramarine blue. I think the red is Spectrum Red. I'm not 100% sure, but I think it's Spectrum Red. And the orange might as well be called Transparent Orange, because it yeah, I mixed an orange, and wow, oranges are just transparent. Okay, so those layers that I'm now working on top of are completely dry. So now I'm just dipping my brush into white, and then I'm just tapping on the very surface of the orange, and it's reactivating the orange a little bit, but that's enabling me to blend the white into the orange. What I didn't want sort of this spotlight of white on that part of the wing. It had to be quite dulled down a little bit, and then I could carry on building up the surface as it was drying. And that little stippling effect, that's just little dot 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 with the brush, gives the wing a textured look, because obviously butterflies' wings aren't made of silk, they're covered in tiny scales, and I wanted that to be replicated in this painting. If you're looking to do insects and things like that, well, anything really in flora and fauna, in wildlife, if you're like me, if you really love putting detailing into your works, then you need to work bigger. Because if I'd have worked this butterfly smaller, I wouldn't have been able to have done this, or I would have found it, a lot more difficult to have got this effect. But by working that little bit bigger, yes, there's more work to do, but yes, you can go in and get more detail in there as well. So I think this piece to me would be more realistic than stylized. It's not scale for scale with the reference image, but it's pretty much there with the coloration, the markings, the scale and composition between the flower and the butterfly. So now I'm working the red as well. I'm going in with a little bit of brown mixed into the red now, just to darken certain areas, and it is all the stippling effect now, the tiny dots. You can just let your hand go loose and just dab up and down, and just let the tip of the brush do the work, keeping in mind that you will be slightly reactivating the layers underneath. And there's nothing you can really do about that apart from spray a fixative, but then there's no point in working it with gouache if you're going to start applying fixatives and working the layers independently. You might as well switch and work with, say, acrylic. So once I got the white areas into the wing, I just needed them roughly in the right place, following the guidelines that I'd already laid down from the sketch. And then once I got the white in, I could start adding the colour around the whites and shaping the white areas. So, I mean, the left-hand side of the wing at the top, the edge of the wing, they're just blocks, like rectangles of white. That was just so I could get that white down. But if you look at the finished painting, those rectangles of white are no longer rectangles of white. I've shaped them into the correct shape using the surrounding colours. And you can push the colour into the white just to shift it a little bit. Obviously careful not to reactivate the white, because it'll make everything look milky. It'll take away the true colour. So I added a little fringe of white feathering along the edge of the wing there, finished off the panels between the veins, and now I'm moving down to the rest of the thorax. Now I think if I was to paint this butterfly again, because this is a great thing, isn't it, about hindsight. Life would be easy if we lived life in hindsight. I would have turned the butterfly round to face the opposite direction, and I think by doing that I would have been able to have kept the board upright throughout the painting, but because of how I'm working and the butterflies facing towards the right, it just felt more natural to paint it on its side. So building up the layers again, so it's exactly rinse and repeat, exactly the same process that I used for the first part of the wing. And it's just going backwards between lights and darks. If I go too dark, that's fine, as long as that layer is dry. I can start adding the lights very carefully, with a light hand, tiny brush strokes, tiny little dabs. Really the only time that I was actually putting brush strokes on as such was the base layers, as you can see that I'm doing there. And when it came down to working the hairs on the body, on the thorax, they were quite long strokes of brush strokes as well, and obviously brush strokes for the petals. But the rest of it really was just this little dabbing motion, just the texturization motion of my hand and brush. Oh, I loved it. I really enjoyed creating this little painting. It's finished. It's roughly 8 inches by 11, so not too big, but big enough. So following the reference image now, I've got my phone to the left of me with the reference image on, and I just keep glancing at that, making sure that the patterning that I haven't sketched out is going on roughly where it should be. Obviously the patterning is going to differ between individual butterflies, so no two butterflies are identical, and obviously a lot of them, especially in late summer, have got a lot of wear and tear on them as well. So if that's something you like to recreate in your paintings, then that would make for an interesting painting actually, because we end up finding butterflies, you know, with bits of their wings missing and things. It's very sad, but that's nature, isn't it? But it would still make for an ideal practice. And also when butterflies die, you know, when their life comes to an end, you can sometimes find them in the garden, and with natural history, that's great. Pick that butterfly up and draw from I was going to say life, but draw from life, but a dead one, because you can get really close up and personal. Then have a look at the scales on the wings and the hairs on the body and their compound eyes, and amazing. So yeah, if you can, draw from life, and if you can't, draw from reference images. There's 2 websites that I can thoroughly recommend to get reference images from, and that's unsplash.com and pixabay.com. And all of the photographs on those 2 websites are royalty free, copyright free. They've been gifted to those sites by photographers. You're free to sketch from them, draw from them, and then sell your paintings or drawings, or use them just however you want. So that's pixabay.com and unsplash.com. So stippling again, just building up some darks, going in with purples now into the browns. I used quite a bit of purple in the top part of the wing as well, especially where I wanted the black to fade into the brown. Popped a little bit of purple in there. But there's only so much you can say about this process, because it really is a very, very simple process. It just takes practice and patience. And that's the same with everything. If we want to achieve our goals in anything, it's just practice, isn't it, and patience. Practice doesn't make perfect. Practice makes progress, and that's really something to keep in mind, because if we reached perfection, I think then the world would be quite boring, well, especially the artistic world. I know that I'm never going to create anything that's perfect. I'm always going to be able to be self-critique in my works, and that makes me want to achieve more next time and grow as an artist and as a person. And sometimes family members and friends, they're not always the best critics, because if you do ask them to, oh, what do you think of this painting, or what do you think of this drawing, 9 times out of 10 they're going to think it's great, but they're biased 9 times out of 10 as well, because if you're their daughter or their son or their dad or their mum or auntie or uncle, they might be just amazed to see you create anything. I think the best critic we have is ourselves, because the more we create, the more we can see where things don't actually look as they should, and that just comes with time, with experience. So always pat yourself on the back for something that you've achieved that you haven't achieved before, and then maybe with a coffee or a cup of tea, sit down and have a think about your painting. And if you did it again, would you do anything different? Is there something about it you're not quite keen on? And also, if you're going through the creative process and you know something doesn't look right, but you don't know what, there's a few things you can do to sort of get an answer. One is turn your work upside down. 9 times out of 10, or how many times am I going to say that this video? 9 times out of 10, when you turn your work, whether it be a painting or a drawing, upside down, if the proportions are wrong, it really does show itself. Another way is to look at your work in a mirror. I know a lot of the old masters used to do that. And another way, most of us now have got mobile phones that have a camera with them. Take a photograph of your work, and when you see your painting or drawing digitally on such a small scale, it can really pinpoint things that are not quite right. And I constantly take photographs on my phone, obviously for social media, but also for my own benefit as well, and that can work wonders. Also, if you're looking to try out any new medium, say you've been doing pastels for a couple of years and you want to try watercolours, don't expect your first few paintings to be as good as your artworks you're doing with your medium that you're really used to. Give yourself a little bit of time to adjust to your new medium. The saying, jack of all trades, master of none, is quite true when it comes to some professions, but when it comes to art, it doesn't actually work like that, because the concepts that you've learnt within one medium, like contrast, composition, colour mixing and things like that, they're relatable in other mediums as well. So if you do try a new medium, it's not as though you're starting completely from scratch. You'll transfer all the knowledge that you have for one medium over to another medium. So makes learning a new medium more enjoyable, I think, because there's less obstacles. Hope that makes sense. So going in with the white again, just so I don't lose that positioning. And I didn't have very many sketch lines on this part of the wing, this lower half of the wing. It was quite looking at the reference image and then sketching it out. I realised there were lots of tonal changes and value changes and things that were creating patterns, but not necessarily lines that I had to include in my initial sketching. If you would like me to create a video, excuse me, of my sketching process and what lines I look for, what lines I omit, then just drop it in the comment section below and I will do that for you. There is one on my, well, there's a couple. There's one on my channel of me sketching a red squirrel from start to finish sketch. with a graphite pencil, and there's another one where it's digital, so it's me digitally sketching the face of a camel. I work exactly the same no matter what medium I'm using. When it comes to sketching, I go for basic shapes first, nice and loose, and then as I tighten the drawing, that's when I start pulling in details. More stippling. See, I said it was all the same process. And it is. And my hand didn't get tired once, which is great. I was kept fueled by Gecko coffee and a supply of biscuits, I think, and listening to a podcast. So just bringing in some white now. Now I don't want a big white marking. I want white highlights on a muted white marking, just to give the butterfly's wing a little bit more shape. If I was just to put flat white in there, even if I was putting coloured highlights on, blue or orange or something, that flat white would still look flat. So what I did, I used, I mixed up a creamy colour, a little bit. It would have looked a little bit like buff titanium, which is an unbleached titanium. It was that sort of colour, an off-white. By applying that first in quite a thin layer, letting the grey of the paper show through and work for me. But then when I applied the tiny dots of white, they showed up really well and gave that shape to that part of the wing. Pushing white there back into the brown, but very, very light-handedly, because I didn't want to upset the brown and make it mingle with the white. But then again, in some areas I did. In some areas I was applying white or a creamy white and purposefully going a little bit deeper with the brush and reactivating some of the colour underneath to mix with the white. And if I didn't like it, I just waited for it to dry and worked over the top again. And that happened quite a few times. So just because people work as artists, as a profession, doesn't mean we always know what we're doing, doesn't mean we always get things right on the first go. Many paintings start out looking okay and then go through a rough area and get discarded. I mean, 9 times out of 10, yes, I've said it again, 9 times out of 10, most paintings can be pulled back. But if it's going to be quicker just to start afresh, then I do generally start afresh. If I've just gone, an hour into a painting and I'm thinking, nope, shouldn't have done this process, should have done something else, I'll stop. Unless it's on a really expensive canvas, obviously. But then on a really expensive canvas, I can go over it with a fresh coat of gesso, sand it down and completely start again. But if it's on watercolour paper or something like that and I'm thinking, nope, shouldn't have done it this way, then if I haven't given very much time to that project, then I will stop and start again. And it's a learning process. Every time you create, you're banking knowledge into your memory, and it's quite surprising, even if you don't remember doing something before, how easily some things do happen. And you think, oh, I must have done this before because I already knew what I needed to do before I even did it, sort of thing. So the more you create, the easier it does get. But don't forget, just because you find something easy, you still want to be challenging yourself, whether that's creating a new subject you haven't worked with before, or working with a mixture of mediums that you haven't tried before. Else, things can get a little bit stale. I couldn't work in one medium all the time, over and over again. I think I would get bored. But because I work in so many different mediums, it keeps it fresh. And obviously, even though I'm a wildlife artist, I do work with a variety of subjects: birds, mammals, reptiles, amphibians, insects. There's fish. There's so many things to choose from. And that's not to mention all the plant species I want to start introducing into my paintings as well. And then you've got the inorganic elements that I'd like to start introducing as well, rocks and things like that. So yeah, the natural world is endless, so always something different to choose. And if that's one of your problems, that you're spoilt for choice with what to draw, and it's stopping you from creating, just draw anything. If you've got an apple, draw an apple. If you've got a potted plant in your house, draw that potted plant. If you've got a garden, draw some grass or dandelion or anything. As soon as you start drawing, start creating, inspiration will strike and you'll feel more creative in yourself. It just has that domino effect, a knock-on effect. But if you don't know what to draw, so you don't draw anything, that's very rarely that you'll be inspired to do anything anyway. So you might as well just do something, because something is always better than nothing. I'm turning into a philosopher today. So just working on his abdomen there, get him some base coats down, and then I'll apply some fine, they're like guard hairs that run across the abdomen. They're very, very short. And the reason I'm doing the abdomen before I do that finish off that unfinished part of the wing is because the wing is going to be sitting over the top of the abdomen. So I wanted to get the abdomen done first, and then when I do the wing, there's that gentle overlap. So it actually looks like one thing is behind the other. And now I've popped in the legs, and I'll just show you, I know this was butterfly and gouache, but I'll just show you a little bit of the process I used to create the flower as well. If you're still with me, you've been here sort of 42 minutes, thank you very much. You're my tribe. If you haven't already, please like and subscribe to the channel. It really, really helps with the algorithms, the elusive algorithms. There you go, I've pushed the finished painting over to the right hand side, just so you can see more of what I'm doing and see the butterfly in all his glory, or her glory. So mixing up, so I've put that little plastic palette to one side now and just got this little ceramic dish, because I know I'm only going to be working with a yellow, mixing an orange, bringing in a little bit more red, and possibly pulling in some purple. And I wanted to do that in a sort of contained area, and I didn't want to spend 5 minutes washing that little plastic palette when there's paint on there that's still usable. And there might not be much on it, but it's what is there is still usable, and I didn't want to throw it away. I do have other palettes, but this is just ideal for keeping it in the camera and just working with small amounts, which I said is how I like to work with gouache anyway. I do like to work with small amounts. So the first layer is going on to this flower head. All I'm doing is mapping out shapes. Now I could have copied the reference image for this part, but it would have taken me forever. So I studied the reference image, grabbed a coffee, looked at the reference image. I could see sort of how the head of this flower looked, and how little tiny petals and things were curling, and which direction they were growing in, and things like that, and the colour changes and things like that. Then put the reference image to one side for a while I started plotting out a little bit of a map for myself. Obviously, if this flower had been viewed from 5 degrees to the left or 5 degrees to the right, it would have looked completely different to the reference image anyway. As long as it's the same species and the colour variations are in keeping with that species of plant, then I'm happy. And as you can see, so your oranges, yellows and reds are very translucent. So building up a base layer like this is great just to give me an idea of whether everything is, but then I have to start building up layers with more opacity. So it's quite strange. I was using them very thin down like this with water just to map it all out. I then mixed up the same colour but with white, which then created a pastel tone to then go over the layer that I'm doing now. And then when that was dry, go back on with a pure pigment again without the white to tint the white middle layer. So it's a backwards and forwards process. But again, if you're unsure of how to create something, just start small. Start on a scrap piece of paper, get a feel for your products. Definitely make a swatch sheet, because just making a swatch sheet on its own with any medium gives you a feel for a product, especially with a water-soluble product. There you go, I've mixed in a little bit of ultramarine blue to the red just to create that dark purple. And by working with a limited palette again on the flower, the red is actually the red that was used in the butterfly, but by using that limited palette, you're not guaranteed, but you're more or less guaranteed to have a painting that looks correct. It looks unified because you're working from a limited palette. I think with beginners, a lot of beginners, especially if they go into watercolours and they buy a set of watercolours and you get like, I don't know, 48 colours or something, the tendency is they're going to try and use a lot of colours to start off with, whereas the best thing is just to use a cool yellow and a cool red and a cool blue, or a warm yellow, warm red, warm blue. Start mixing some colours from that limited palette, and once you're used to those colour mixes, then you can start adding a colour at a time to your palette, and it just gives you the time just to get used to the colours that you're actually using and also mixing. And I very, very rarely use any pigment straight from a pan or a tube. I'll always mix it with something, because a lot of the pre-made colours can look very false. So I do like to mix them slightly with another colour just to change the hue slightly and give that little bit of variation, so it doesn't look like they've just been squeezed straight out of a tube onto a painting. I know some people like to work like that, but you would end up with a more stylised finished painting. If that's what your aim is, then you go for it. As long as you're enjoying what you're doing, that's the main thing. Now, where I've just there, can you see where the grey of the paper is showing through the yellow? Just around about there, and it's looking a little bit green. I don't know why. Maybe it's because the grey paper has a slight blue hint to it, and the blue of the paper and the yellow is creating a green hue, but I do end up covering a lot of that up, so very little green hue is left in the finished painting. That's why it's always nice to swatch your colours on the paper that you're going to be painting on, because that yellow on a piece of white paper would have just looked yellow, but going over this paper it just had a tendency to look a little bit green. And if it's looking green in my mixing dish, then that's my filming and not the paint. I've not done any colour correction on this video. This is just straight out of my camcorder onto my PC and through the video editor. Oh, I look quite delicate. I was holding the brush then. That's the only trouble with working with a small brush, is that you have to dip it in your pigment often, because it, tiny little short bristles can only hold so much amount of pigment and water. Water control is very important when you're using gouache. You really do need to get used to controlling how much water is in your brush. So flat brushes are great for that, actually. So if you're working on landscapes and things like that and using flat brushes, you can really tell how much water is in a flat brush. Unlike a round brush, they generally hold more water than you realise. So, and I'm working with a round brush now, but it's very small, so obviously I knew its limitations, which was great for working on this project. But yeah, water control, as we were saying earlier, too much water in your second and third layers and fourth or fifth, however many layers you want to do, too much water and the layers underneath will start reactivating, and you'll pull your brush over and end up with bare paper again. Even if you've done 4 or 5 layers, if you've got too much water on your brush, it will just lift the layers or reactivate the layers that are underneath. So if you're working on a substantial paper or cardstock and you make a mistake with gouache, you can just go in with a clean damp brush, reactivate all the pigment that you don't want there, lift it off with a tissue paper, let the paper dry or dry it with a hairdryer, and then go on again. So that is a benefit of gouache. But obviously it can be a disadvantage if you don't want your underneath layers to be moving, and they do. Just something to be aware of. I think to do the flower head, it just took a couple of hours, I believe, just working on the flower head. So it is a slow process, but as I say, it's so enjoyable when you're doing something that you love. The time is irrelevant, really. It just, time whizzes by and you forget to have lunch. And although I never forget to have coffee, funny that, eh? But time just flies by. I love it. I'm very blessed to be able to do what I do. My husband's very supportive, which is great. I call him my Mr. Wonderful. He's going to cringe now, knowing that I've told you that. But he's very supportive, and my mum and my dad are very supportive as well, as are my children, so that's good. So going backwards and forwards, and I've not included it in this, but I do keep drying this with a hairdryer just to make sure everything's completely dry before I go on with the next layer. It just a few seconds with the hairdryer, because it's dry really already, but it's just making sure that it really is dry as it can be. And you can work some aspects of watercolour with gouache, as it is an opaque watercolour, like wet into wet. If you work quickly, I was putting the purple onto the red there and just letting it bleed up into the red that I'd just applied. But because it dries very quickly, you've got to be quite quick with applications like that. Unless you're working on watercolour paper and you're doing big washes, you can do that and treat your first layers of gouache more like a traditional watercolour. Excuse me. I'm building up some shadowing in areas, and I can go on with highlights later. Just mapping a little bit out at a time. And I just carried on doing the whole flower head like this, and exactly the same for the larger petals. Just took a while longer because of having to apply a few coats of white to begin with on the larger flower petals. If you'd like me to create some videos of flowers and plants or fruit or anything like that, you know, nature related, obviously the natural world related, so flowers or reptiles, amphibians, or, you know, different species of plants or lichens or plants on rocks or anything like that, just let me know. There he is, finished. If you've made it this far, thank you so very much. Your support is truly appreciated. Join me over on Facebook and X and Instagram. Where else am I? MeWe, on them all. And join me soon for another video tutorial. Take care, stay creative everybody. See you soon, and bye for now. Bye bye. Hi there my friends, welcome back to my YouTube channel. Grab a drink, grab your sketchbook and supplies, and let's have some quality art time together. So I'm starting a brand new sketchbook. It's a Talens art creation sketchbook. It measures 13 by 21 centimetres. Now I've popped the finished double page spread for you to see where I'm heading, but as I started I was just looking at my reference images and not quite knowing what I wanted to do, so I thought I'd start with the polar bear walking, and it's from a photograph that I took when I was in the Arctic last August. So I always sketch really lightly to begin with, and you will see the lines slowly develop, just starting with vague shapes and swapping to a dark pencil now, so hopefully you'll be able to see the sketch as it appears. So just looking for basic shapes and no details, leave the details to last. And if you're painting, I knew I was going to be painting in gouache. I didn't want to put too many details in because they were going to be covered up by the paint. Hope everyone's keeping well. I know it can be a frightening experience for some people starting a new sketchbook, especially first page or so, but I just like to jump in, and if I make a mess, it's just what it is. It's just a sketchbook. It's for trying out new ideas, maybe new materials, and just having some relaxing time. Give yourself permission to play with your materials, and that really is what a sketchbook is all about. Well, for some anyway, and it definitely for me. So I hadn't tried one of these sketchbooks before, and I wanted to see how well it coped with gouache, and it coped really well. So I will be using this sketchbook in particular for gouache sketches and studies and things. But just relax. It's only art materials after all, and it's only a page, and if you don't want to show anybody your sketchbook, that's fine. It's just for you to practice and play in. So just quickly run through what this video is going to contain for you. It's going to contain all the 4 sketches, and then I'll zoom right into the painting that I did on the top right hand corner of the polar bear leaning on his paw, and you'll get to see that from start to finish. But as I said, just sketch along if you want to, or just have me playing in the background if you want to. I don't know if there's any pearls of wisdom in this video at all, but on this particular day when I started this sketchbook, I just wanted to relax, and the best way for me to relax is just to pick up a pencil and some paper and just sketch and experiment, really. If you ask my husband how I relax, it's definitely not when I'm watching a film. If I watch a film, I tend to talk through it, unless we're in the cinema. So yeah, I do get fidgety, but this is a lovely way to relax. A nice cup of coffee, listening to a podcast or listening to some music. Yeah, just relax. So you can see the basic shapes slowly taking shape now of this little polar bear. I'm pleased to say I've been invited back to the Arctic in June of this year, so I'll put a link to that in the description. And the idea last year, I guess, was a familiarisation trip. I was invited to the Arctic, as I said, in August of last year. We sailed right the way around Spitsbergen, so far north that there's no Wi-Fi, no telephone, mobile networks or anything like that. You're completely cut off from everywhere else. It's fantastic. It's an amazing experience. And yeah, a familiarisation trip really, to familiarise myself with the ship and how everything works, not mechanically obviously, but how the crew work. And we had landings in the Zodiac boats, and we got to see 11 wild polar bears and Arctic foxes, Arctic puffins, harbour seals and bearded seals and whales, humpback whales, and just amazing, absolutely amazing experience. And the idea really is, for this year, they've invited me back over there on board ship this year, is to actually be painting and drawing and sketching on sea days when there aren't any landings or between landings. And as I'm sketching and painting, if people want to bring along their art supplies, then, you know, we're encouraging that, and then people can have a go themselves at sketching what they've seen or what they'd like to see, if they bring some reference images with them. And I'll be there 24/7 to encourage people, hopefully inspire people to have a go, and yeah, make the most of the trip really. An added attraction. I believe that somebody's referred to me as an added attraction. I don't know about that much, but yeah. So I've mentioned the sketchbook that I've started. The pencils I'm using now, these are erasable coloured pencils, so they're not water soluble or anything like that, just erasable, and they're by Faber-Castell, I believe. And they come in a variety of colours, but I just tend to stick with a colour that I think is going to blend in if any of it shows through the paint. Gouache paint that I'll be using in a bit is just opaque watercolour. As I said, I'd not used these sketchbooks before, didn't know how they'd hold up to water-soluble mediums, and really surprisingly well with gouache. Although I didn't use any really wet washes of colour on this paper, as it's not very thick. I'm just having a look now. It's £94. It is acid free, but it's only £94 in weight. And as if I was to work with watercolours or gouache on a watercolour paper, I'd be looking at using something like £140. So with this one being only £94, I didn't know whether it was going to buckle or whether the surface would peel back or anything like that, but it didn't. It was wonderful. And as I said, these pencils are erasable, and I did use the eraser a couple of times and there was no problem with the paper at all. So I can thoroughly recommend this paper for gouache, coloured pencil, graphite, charcoal, etc. We'll be using one of the other sketchbooks. I have quite a few of them now, so all lined up and ready to use. And I will be trying out inks. I know you can use marker pens, sort of alcohol markers on them, but they do bleed through, so that is just something to be aware of if you're a alcohol marker artist, or if that's something you want to work in. But if I do work in one of the sketchbooks in anything like that as a medium, then I will video it and show you. So yeah, this was my relaxing day. It was I painted the sketchbook over 4 days, did all the sketching in one go. Sketching doesn't take very long, but the paintings I did over 4 days, one each day for 4 days. Now what I'm doing there is just using a tissue, just a normal soft tissue, and it just blends the pencil down a little bit so it's not so stark and harsh looking. And sometimes when I'm sketching, I'll do that between layers of a sketch. So I get my really light lines down first, maybe shapes, circles, ovals, even squares or triangles sometimes. Then I'll rub over that with a tissue, go back on with the erasable pencil again, form darker lines. And what I'm always looking for is to redefine shapes. Start off with very simple shapes, ovals and circles and things, and get the basic proportions. And there's nothing worse than working through a drawing and then realising you've got the proportions wrong on something. So it's always best to work with a light hand. When you're happy with your basic proportions, shapes and sizes, then you can dull those lines down, as I do with a tissue, or you can use a kneadable eraser and lightly rub that over the lines, soften the lines down, and then start introducing a darker line where you actually want the lines to be, where you can see the shapes are correct and the composition and things are correct. So I hope everybody's keeping well and warm. It's damp and wet here in the UK at the moment, but hoping that spring's just round the corner. And then I'll get out and do some plein air sketching, I think. Looking forward to doing that. So again, just measuring things against themselves as well. Sometimes you'll see my pencil hover above the surface of the paper, making shapes but not actually touching the paper, and that's just me getting a feel of the shape that I actually want to place onto the paper. So it's like drawing in mid-air. Bit like shadow boxing, I guess. I don't know if people still do that. I don't know if boxers still do that. But it's just bringing back that muscle memory. When you start sketching, if you've never freehand sketched before, I know there's a lot of artists out there that encourage beginners to trace, and there's nothing wrong with that. You know, you're going to be starting somewhere, but don't be reliant upon sketching. Do practice freehand drawing as well, and you'll be surprised, the more you do it, the better you'll get, as long as you are concentrating on composition and proportions and things. And what you can do is, if you're working from a reference image, you can trace that reference image and then freehand it, and then place your tracing over your freehand drawing, and that way you'll be able to see the things that you've got right and the things that might need altering. Just a really good way to keep practicing. So I was hoping that the camera was going to pick up these lines a little bit more than they have, but I'll know for next time just to sketch a little bit darker for you. If a sketchbook page or spread is something that you'd like to see more often, just drop it in the comments below, and that's not a problem at all. Sorry for my hair getting in the shot, but I just wanted to get this part of the drawing correct. As I said, all of these lines are going to be covered up with gouache paint in a bit. This video is running at just under an hour, so there you go. For those of you that have been asking for longer videos, here's one for you. And as you can see, I have tilted the sketchbook slightly, just leaning on that little wicker tray, because the glare from the lighting that I've got in the studio was just washing the lines out a little bit for me. So by tilting the paper a little bit, it was easier for me to see without me getting my head in the way of the camera all the time. So just keeping it loose and only putting enough, just putting enough detail in for me. Now this is going to differ from one person to another. So if you want to do a drawing and then you want to paint on top, some people need lots and lots of what I call guidelines, lines to guide their hand when they finally go in for the painting part. Some people need less than I do, and everyone else is sort of in the middle somewhere. So this is so individual to every single person, whether they're a beginner or more experienced. You'll only know how much of a drawing to lay down once you've been doing it for a while. The worst thing is to not have enough. I guess you're better off having too many guidelines than not enough to begin with. And this is where being able to draw helps you being able to paint. If I go into a painting thinking that I've got all the guidelines down that I need, and then I start painting and realise that I haven't got something in, maybe I've missed an ear or something like that. It happens. Being able to draw means I can paint it in without having to draw it in first. I hope that makes sense. So yeah, just start off with too many guidelines, I guess, if you're really unsure, and then you can always work over them anyway if you're using an opaque medium. If you're using a transparent, translucent medium such as normal transparent watercolour, some of your guidelines will show up if you go in too dark. So again, keep your sketches nice and light, and I think the main thing to keep in mind is just relax. I hear of beginners being frightened of doing a drawing, you know, frightened of starting, especially you've got this big blank page staring at you. Well, one, you could just put a watercolour wash over the whole thing to begin with, just to get rid of that white colour, and then put your sketch on top. If you're frightened of damaging your watercolour paper or whatever paper you're going to be working on, sketch on a piece of tracing paper. Then once you've got your sketch how you want it, transfer that sketch to your watercolour paper. And that will save you having to erase on a more precious piece of paper. As I said, this paper was wonderful, and no qualms now about moving forward with this sketchbook. I don't do a lot of sketchbook work, but this year I feel like I'm being drawn to do it, if that makes sense. I feel the need to do it, I guess, the need to sketch more in a sketchbook. If I'm working on a big project, I don't bother sketching it out in a sketchbook. I sketch it out on cheap pieces of paper while I'm working out compositions and things, and then transfer that over onto a canvas or watercolour paper or canvas board, anything like that, and paint from there. But these studies I know are going to help me when I get to the Arctic in June. I'll already have a feel for the species that I'm going to be seeing there, hopefully again. You're not guaranteed you're going to see a polar bear. We were very blessed last year to see 11. I'm saying we, the people that were on the ship with me. When I was sent out there, I'd only been given 2 weeks' notice, and I flew out. It's 3 flights to get out there, and obviously 3 flights back. But I knew on the way there, on the flights going, I wouldn't know anybody. The people that were sending me weren't even going to be there, so it was like, wow, must be mad. But life's an adventure. It's not a spectator's sport, so you've got to make the most of these opportunities when they're offered to you. Another thing, if you want to delve a little bit more into sketching, is sketching from videos and DVDs, wildlife documentaries and things like that. Let them play and try and sketch along. You can always pause them if you want to tighten up a sketch a little bit more. Obviously these wildlife documentaries are copyrighted, so you wouldn't be able to produce a painting and sell it or anything from freeze framing a video or anything like that. Keep saying video, you know what I mean, a film. But you can practice for yourself. You can practice your sketching skills, painting skills and things like that, as long as it's just for you. Then it doesn't really infringe the filmmaker's copyright, because you're not profiting from it at all. Okay, so the sketches were in. I did the bear at the top left to begin with, and then the bear bottom left, and then set the camera up and ready to rock and roll on this one. So surrounding the bear, I just mixed up a nice, quite a thick mixture of gouache, painted that round to create this silhouette effect, and then, which is just plain and simple, going on quite thickly with the gouache. As I said, I didn't want to use too wet a wash on this paper, with the paper being so thin compared to an actual watercolour painting paper. This isn't advertised as a watercolour sketchbook, it's simply advertised as a sketchbook, and obviously the paper is sort of a creamy tone to it. Would be nice if they did a darker, sort of a real mid-tone paper, but I've not looked into that yet. So all I'm doing now, I'm looking at my reference image and I'm just seeing where the darks are, where the lights are, and that's what I want to get in at the moment. Just concentrating on getting where the toes are, where the nails are, and the darks and lights within the fur. And you've got to look through the surface layers of a photograph, if that makes sense. You've got to see what's under all that lovely fine polar bear fur, and just imagine the shapes that are underneath it. And one way of doing that is you can either blur your reference photograph slightly using an app on your phone, or you could use Photoshop or Procreate, things like that, or you can squint. So I do a lot of squinting when I'm in the studio, and that's just to, if you squint, all you see are the contrasts and not the detail, and you want to get past looking at the detail to begin with when working with gouache. Lots of artists work with gouache and they go from dark to light. It's opaque, it can do that. I tend to go dark to light and then light to dark and then a little bit of dark to light, so I just go backwards and forwards. But it's such an enjoyable medium and the time just flies by. It dries so quickly. There's no wastage, because whatever's on your palette can be reactivated just with water. The cleanup at the end of a painting session is simple because you wash your brushes just in water. I'm using deionized water in 2 pots, so one for washing the brushes and one for picking up fresh water. The paints are all Winsor & Newton Artists Quality Gouache, and I've just got the tubes, squeezed them into this little tiny palette that went out to the Arctic with me last year, and just playing with this tiny little plastic palette. You don't need much, you really don't. You could use, if you buy some paints, just buy some primary colours to begin with. You can buy them open stock tubes, just something to mix your paints on. So you could use a piece of plastic like this, you could use a tile, a ceramic tile, or a kitchen plate, as long as it's pot one, and just experiment and just play. The brushes I'm using in this were actually from a little pack of brushes from the pound shop. I know everything's not a pound anymore in the pound shop, so this little pack of brushes, I think you get 12 brushes and it was like £3 something, and I thought, yep, they look okay, they'll do, just for having a play with. I have got other brushes. You can use your watercolour brushes with gouache, that's not a problem. The thing is, gouache is a little bit of a thicker paint, so you need your brushes to be a little bit firmer. You don't want to be using natural hair brushes that are soft and absorbent. I don't use natural hair. I like my products to be vegan where possible. And these little brushes are made with nylon, Taclon nylon. Golden Taclon is a sort of a nylon fibre, and they worked incredibly well. So I will be using these a lot more in the future. But as I said, you can use your watercolour brushes. You don't have to go and buy anything specific for painting with gouache. Now, using different intensity of colour, so making watery mixtures and thicker mixtures too. Dry brushing is one where you've got very little water on your brush, just the paint. Okay, just drying it off there. I'm drying the back of the page as well, and this stops it from buckling, stops the paper from buckling if you dry the front and the back. And as you can see, that paper hasn't buckled at all. So dry brushing is just having a very damp, not a wet brush, just damp, picking up the pigment and just applying that on top. Don't press down too hard, and don't let the top layers be too wet, else they will reactivate the paint that's underneath. So you wouldn't want to be putting a big watery wash on now, because it would lift the paint that's already there. If you find you're placing something down and you don't like it, obviously you can get a damp brush, go in, lift it out with a tissue, dry the paper and start again. More dry brushing, building up the darks. If you see me keep leaning over, I'm just tapping my iPad so the screen stays switched on so I can see my reference image. Building in some textures, just adding some darks. Keeping the brush quite dry. I think each little painting took, I don't know, a couple of hours each. Just relaxing. Probably singing along to, I don't know, Michael Bublé or something at the minute. Or listening to a podcast more likely. Getting those darks in. And it's really freeing because you can really be really messy with the base coats that you're putting on, because of the paint being opaque. You know that your layers that you go on top with are just going to cover anything up that you don't like. So using one of the brushes out of the little cheapy pack creates a lovely point. Didn't lose its point at all, and I was able to start adding some more detail on top. So I'm going from dark to light now. You'll see how opaque these paints are, because obviously the background is a navy blue. Well, it's a bit of a purpley blue actually, but it's very dark, and the mixture that I've got now is able to go over that, not a problem at all. And there you go. Wow, we're over halfway through the video already. If you are painting along or drawing or sketching, I'd love to know what you're working on at the moment. I do read all the comments and reply to everybody if they have questions. If you'd like to see me work in a particular medium in a sketchbook, just let me know, or a particular subject, then let me know. A lot of people have been asking for airbrushing videos, so that's something on my to-do list now. So just moving the sketchbook round so that I'm more comfortable. Still using that little wicker tray, upside down tray, to prop the book up against. Just makes it easier for me to see what I'm doing. And that's another thing, when you're painting, if you're uncomfortable, it can be really hard to get into the flow. So if it means turning your drawing pad or sketchbook or canvas upside down or on its side or anything like that, just do it. Being comfortable has got to be optimum. It saves injury to yourself if you're sitting at an easel or a table for a long time. Been there, done that. Won't be doing it again. So stay comfortable, stay hydrated as well. I drink copious amounts of coffee, but some of it is decaf, it's not all caffeinated. And good lighting is another thing, so make sure you're working either in natural daylight or get a nice little light bulb that is daylight light bulb and work under that, and you'll see your colours a lot more true as well if you're working under a daylight bulb. So these brushes were amazing. God, what a find. They came in a little plastic wallet. Cool. When I've finished with the palette up on the right hand side, when I've finished painting for the day, I'll just spray that all with water. It comes with like a rubber gasket fitting top that goes on top, and then a top that clips down, and that'll be good to go for the next painting session then. If your gouache dries out, don't worry. If it dries out really quick, it can crack, but it's paint, it's fine. Just spray it with water 10 minutes before you're due to paint again, and it should be good to go. And when your colours get dirty, the middle red looks dirty because it's got blue in it. Wait for it to dry out a little bit. Go in with a damp brush, just lift that pigment off, and you'll be back to clean colours again. White's always the one that gets dirty, so I always have a tube of white paint to one side as well, just if I need some real fresh white put in on my palette. I'll just squeeze a little bit out of a fresh tube. But the one in the palette at the top, it's just above the reds, is fine. It gets a little bit contaminated from time to time, but nothing to worry about at all. I also have the jelly gouache cups. I use those from time to time as well, and if you're thinking of getting started with gouache, there's nothing wrong with those either. I've done some really pleasing paintings with those in the past. Obviously they don't have any light fast information with them, so I wouldn't be displaying them on the wall or anything like that, but for sketchbook work they're fine. So if that's something you already have or were thinking of getting, then yeah, feel free. But these Winsor & Newton Artist gouache, you can buy them in a tube, or you can get them open stock, which means you can buy 1 or 2 or 4 colours, you know, your favourite colours. If you're unsure which colours to go for, just get some primary colours, a yellow, a blue and a red, and make sure you get a big tube of white, because white is something that you will go through quite a bit when working with gouache. It's also worth getting a black or a Payne's grey too. As I said, these paints dry really quickly. I didn't have to dry that pour with a hairdryer, and I'm leaning right on it now. It's completely dry. They air dry very, very quickly. If I'm working on a larger area, I will go over it with the hairdryer just to finish it off. But apart from that, they're good to go straight away. If in doubt, blast it with a hairdryer or a heat tool, as long as your heat tool is not too close to the paper. And when you're working on the base coat, washes and things, make sure you're drying the back of the paper if possible too. Obviously the paintings on the right hand side, on the left hand side of the sketchbook, I couldn't dry the back of that part of the paper because that is actually attached to the sketchbook cover, so that wouldn't have cockled anyway. That's why I wanted to get those 2 paintings done to start off with before filming this one, because this one is really putting the paper to the test because it isn't attached at the back to a cover or anything. It was more likely to cockle, but it didn't. Now working with gouache dry, if you haven't worked with gouache before, it dries with quite a rough texture. Obviously this dries matte, but it's a lovely texture if you like working in coloured pencils or mixed mediums and things. This is lovely because the gouache gives you added texture, so you can put coloured pencils on top. can speed up the process, I guess, of having a more detailed drawing, coloured pencil drawing, if you go on with some gouache or watercolour base coats first. So a little bit of white gouache going on now, because I don't want to lose that nice lighter coloured edge along the front of his face. And now I'm stippling. So what that is, I've got one of the brushes, I wet it and then scrubbed it dry, well, dryish, on a piece of tissue, and then I'm stamping the brush up and down into the white gouache paint and then doing the same on the paper. The hairs along the top of the bear would be very, very short, so I wouldn't want to be painting those in like I did on his paw. So what I'm doing, I'm just adding a little bit of texture, and obviously this is just gouache, so if I go wrong I can either, or if I overdo it too much, I can either lift it off with a damp brush or just wait for it to dry and paint over it again. So just letting that break the edge there, going up his head towards where his ears are, breaking that line just with a few little hairs, wispy hairs. Back down to the face. Keeping an eye on reference images is a must, because the hair length and hair direction and hair texture on animals can change quite quickly depending on what part of the body of the animal you're looking at. So if a brush stroke looks good in one area of the subject, it might not necessarily look great everywhere. So knowing that the hairs near his forehead would be very short, and some of them would actually be facing the viewer depending on what angle you're viewing the bear at, all you're going to see are the tips of the hairs. So that's a good place where the stippling effect technique can come in. There you go, went a little bit too thick there with the paint, but it doesn't matter. And if it's starting to look too white, then I can glaze over it with another colour. And glazing over gouache, you've just got to have a very light hand. It can be done. Some artists say it can't, that it'll lift the paint underneath, but I know lots of other artists who are more than happy to be able to glaze over layers of gouache. And it's just about keeping a very light hand. I think water management is the only thing with gouache that takes a little bit of getting used to, especially if you're used to painting with watercolour. But give yourself sort of half an hour or so and you'll soon get the hang of how much water to have in your brush. I'm not that keen on using water brushes with gouache. They're the brushes where they actually hold water in the barrel and you can squeeze them to let little droplets of water out into the brush. I like to be more in control than that when I'm using gouache. They're fine for using ink tints, which is water-soluble ink, or watercolours, but when it comes to gouache, I do like a normal brush to paint with. And that way I know exactly how much water versus pigment I'm getting into my brush. And this is another reason why it's nice to work with golden Taklon brushes. If you go for, I do have fake, they're called faux, aren't they? Faux squirrel brushes, faux sable brushes for watercolour painting. But the trouble is they just hold, for gouache anyway, they hold too much water. And you've got the tendency of the water to rush down the bristles if you're not careful, the fibres. Also, when you're dipping your brushes into your water, make sure that there aren't droplets of water on that metal furrow part of the brush, because if you start painting and there are droplets on that part of the brush, there's a likelihood that they'll run down into your bristles and then into your paint or onto your painting surface. And when that happens and you're not expecting it, it can cause you to have to backtrack a little bit. So building up some more colour, heating him up a bit, making him look a bit warmer. We don't want it all to be white. Polar bears have got black skin, and their hairs are actually hollow fibres, because that's what keeps them insulated. And very reflective coats, so they do reflect a lot of the colours around them. So the polar bear at the bottom left, the pinky lilac-y one, was just something I wanted to do. Don't ask me why, I just fancied doing something different. The joy of a sketchbook. The joy of painting for you and not painting for other people. When it comes to commissions and things like that, obviously you've got to be a lot stricter with yourself, especially if it's pet portrait. It's got to be spot on. The owner of whatever you're painting will know his pet like you'd know a child, I guess. But when it's just for you, drawing and painting for yourself is always the best feeling, because it's freeing, really is freeing. Wow, I'm waffling a lot today, aren't I? Okay, you can experiment with holding your brush in different ways as well. If this is something new, holding your brush upright like you've just seen me doing enables you to use the very tip of the brush instead of using more of the fibres of the brush with the length of the brush. Holding your hand further back along the handle gives a looser brush stroke. So it's nice if you're painting foliage and things like that and grasses, to move your hand further back away from the painting, further back along the handle of the brush. That's why you'll see a lot of artists working at easels with oils and acrylics sometimes have long handled brushes, and that's because they want to get their hand as far away from the painting as possible, so that the brush strokes are a bit more freer, a bit more looser. The further towards the brush your hand goes, the tighter the brush strokes will be. So a little bit of glazing in there. I felt I hadn't got enough depth, and darkening the eye slightly. As I said, I go backwards and forwards. Roughly 9 times out of 10 I start out dark to light, but then I'll adjust it as I go. So not covering up the background washes completely, else it would have been a waste of time putting all those colours in to begin with. Letting some of them peek through between the strands of fur and the clumps and clusters of fur. And towards the end, and I don't know if I've included it in the video, I think I have, but I'm not sure. If the fur starts looking too rigid, then I'll just dampen a brush and just very, very lightly drag the brush over the fur in the direction that the fur is going, and that just softens the edges of each brush stroke but doesn't eliminate them. Just looks like a soft focus effect. You can see it on the back of the bear to the left of the page. So I've just worked that bear exactly the same as this bear, but at the end I just took a damp brush and just very, very lightly swept it along the fur, and it just softens everything down. Oh, this just makes me want to go back into the studio now and get the sketchbook back out and start another spread. But I've got so much to do that I've not got time today. Maybe tomorrow. Maybe go in there and do some sketching tomorrow, in between painting other things as well. When you're painting on something like this, as I said, each painting took maybe a couple of hours, but that's not necessarily 2 hours just sitting painting. I'll get up, make a drink, come back. do a little bit. Working this small is lovely. It's very manageable, especially when you've got a lot of other works on the go at the same time. But working this small can be tiring, more tiring than actually working on a bigger piece. So keep that in mind. And if you are sitting staring at an artwork, like small, putting detailed in, or any artwork to be honest, give yourself breaks, 20 minutes, half an hour. Get up, have a stretch, make a drink if you need one. Take some washing upstairs, something like that, just to give yourself that break. It gives you a physical break, but it also gives you a mental break from it as well. It gives your eyes a rest as well. So if you're working close up like this, make sure occasionally you look out the window. Take your glasses off if you need to wear glasses for close work. Take your glasses off, look out of the window. Let the muscles that control your eyes do something different by looking into the distance and focusing on something in the distance, and that will prevent any eye strain as well. So what I've done with this brush is the dry brushing effect as well. I've wet the brush in water, pinched it dry, and then between my fingertips I've splayed the bristles slightly and then gone into the paint. And it just gives you sort of a feathered effect on the brush tip. Makes working to put detail in a little bit easier. I was tripping over my words then. I think one of the troubles of doing voiceovers for videos is I don't want to keep repeating myself, that something excuse me, that I've said in a previous video and I'm saying again in this one, until my friend said to me, well, this might be the first video of yours somebody's watched. Okay, yep, note taken. It could be, so they wouldn't know if I'm repeating myself from another video. Oh, I love gouache. It just goes on so nicely. It's so... Oh, it's lovely. That paint that I'm putting on now looks a bit like it's got a greenish tinge, but that's my camera skills, I'm afraid. That's my filming skills. These were sort of creams and beiges and... yeah, not green. It might just be my monitor screen that's showing it to be slightly green, but it's not. It's just so fulfilling. Painting anything, even the ones where I'm not happy with them, there's still, you know, you experimenting and things like that, and some things don't turn out or you want them to begin with. Even that's fulfilling, because there's never a wasted moment when you're creating art. If it doesn't turn out how you want it to turn out, it's a learning curve. You've learnt how not to do something, or how you'd rather not do something next time round. And it also builds muscle memory. As I said during the sketching part of the video at the beginning, when you're sketching and drawing and painting, you subconsciously you're building muscle memory, which will enable you to do things better and easier the next time you try. I think that's why a lot of artists, including myself, can say they can look at a completed painting that they've done but not actually remember doing parts of it. And I think it's you go on to sort of an automatic mode, autopilot, and you're actually doing something that is second nature to you. A little bit like driving a car. You're not constantly thinking about, oh, now I need to change to the second gear, now I need to change to the third gear. It's automatic pilot after you've been driving for a while. It's not something you consciously think of. And I think the same is for painting and drawing too. Now that is just a damp brush. That's what I was talking about earlier. Just softening the edges of strokes that have already been put down and that have already dried. And on to this paw. What a cute bear. Oh, they're so lovely. although I wouldn't want to be in the same room as one. We saw one in the Arctic feeding on a beluga carcass. It hadn't killed it, I don't think. I think it was scavenging. But oh, the power is tremendous. It's just, God. You see them on documentaries and things, but until you see them in action in the wild, it's like a completely different animal. Seeing them in the wild, it's wow. Yeah, amazing, absolutely amazing. Okay, so working dark to light again. I'd already got the base coat layers down on this paw and just building up some detail and texture, and that's not a physical texture. None of this paint stands any higher than any other of the paint that's on the paper. It's just a visual texture that I'm referring to. Yes, the gouache paint does dry with a textured surface, but it's not a texture that you would physically see, if that makes sense. How many times in one video can I say if that makes sense? Oh. So not happy with that shadow, wanted to go a little bit darker, deepening it with a little bit of red so it's not looking flat. And if you use black in your paintings, don't use it on its own, always mix it with something else so it doesn't look black. Shadow areas are great if you use purples and burgundies and things like that, or blues, dark blues, and highlights are nice if you mix lilacs in with them. It just livens things up. You just don't want to use black for shadows and white for highlights because it'll look very false. So even where I've gone on for some white on the polar bear, I am tinting it slightly, as you can see there, with a little bit of cream. A little bit more dry brush in there. You can see the bristles of the brush are splayed apart, and it just makes it easier to paint fur texture by splaying your bristles apart. Obviously, if you want a sharp edge, then you don't want to splay the bristles apart. You want to keep the bristles in a brush together. Going in with white now, just along that edge, and stippling. So I'm stabbing the brush up and down in the paint, splaying the bristles, and then doing exactly the same on the painting. If you're working with a bigger brush, you can do that to make it look like it's got snow on it. Or you can use a spatter effect. Gouache is brilliant for spatter effects because of its thicker consistency. You can spatter it with a toothbrush or with a harder bristle brush. Now, I can't remember now if I go back and soften, because the white that's up there, yes I do. So I do go back and soften it, just tinting it very, very slightly. I did tell you that I go backwards and forwards between light to dark and dark to light, going in with the darks again. And I will do that, just balancing a painting, even a tiny painting like this, just balancing it as I go along. The more you do, the more you'll see. And flitting from one area to another on a painting is just keeping the balance of a painting. So that's the balancing contrast, or it could be a balancing colour, a balance of lighting, anything like that. I will, no matter what medium I'm working in, I will flip from one part to another as the painting builds up. And there you have it. All done. 4 little paintings on a little sketchbook spread 13 by 21 centimetres. Please like and subscribe if you've made it this far. It's really appreciated. Drop a comment below if you'd like to ask a question or just leave a comment in general. I do reply to everybody's comments. If there's a question there, I'll definitely answer it as best I can. Any advice you need, just let me know, and I'll see you all next time. Take care, everybody. Bye. Hi there, my friends. Welcome to my YouTube channel. Just finished a little project and I thought, what shall I do now before I start another bigger project? And I thought, I know, I would like to decorate this little sketchbook. It's by Arteza. It's a cold press paper. The page size is 5.5 inches by 3.5 inches. That's 14 by 9 centimetres. So it's got a little elasticated thing to keep it closed when you're out travelling. Let's open it up. Inside you get one of these. Just gives you an idea on some of the other Arteza products that they do. I don't have any of those, just got these sketchbooks. I've not used this one before, so be interesting to give it a go, but it's a bit bland, isn't it? A bit boring to look at. And it's coated with, it's covered with a canvas. So, and apparently you can decorate this, so I'll sketch on it and paint on it and see how it goes. So a little room for your details. I'd probably just put a phone number on there, not an address. And in the back there's a little pocket, expandable pocket that you can keep little mementos in, or stickers or things like that. So let's have a look. There are, how many sheets? 80 pages, so it's double-sided, so 40 sheets, and you can paint or draw on either side. But to start off with, I will open it up. Let's hope it opens up completely. Yep, so it does. It opens up flat, which is nice. So that's going to be ideal for out sketching. But it also means that I can flip it over and I can decorate, I can paint or whatever, this side because it's canvas. So I will go and get a sketch onto this. And we'll take it from there. See you in a bit. And back. So, had to scroll through some photos that I took a while ago at Chester Zoo. Found one of a rhino laying down, so I thought that's ideal. So, sketched on with a 5B, Derwent 5B, so nice and soft. And popped in some basic shapes. Now I'm not kidding, but trying to sketch on this canvas was like doing a magic eye test, because it was really, I don't know, it's just something about the weave. It was just affecting my eyes, so I had to turn off the studio lighting and sketch it out in sort of quite a darkened room to stop my eyes going funny. But it's on. The soft pencil 5B went on really nicely. It's not smudging or anything, not that I've noticed. So I didn't know what paint, but I've decided I'm going to go with gouache. So I will go and get my gouache supplies and I'll see you back in a bit. Okay, I'm back with some paint supplies, so let's get a palette set up. Just move that out of the way for a minute and pull this over. Now what this is just a glass chopping board. You can get these from sort of supermarkets and places like that. So that's all it is. It's sort of a tempered glass chopping board, and we're going to use this as our palette today. So let me have a look. See where I've put that. So this is just a piece of cellulose sponge. It's what you use for cleaning and things like that. All I'm going to do is pop that there. I'm just going to submerge this in water, take it out, give it a squeeze so that it's nice and damp. So you don't want it wringing wet. Okay, and place this on the board like that. Then get some kitchen roll, and you're going to place the kitchen roll on top of the sponge. I'm doing all of this to stop my paints drying out too much when I'm using them. Just going to get a little spritzer bottle here. This one's by Derwent. Can't get the lid off. There you go. This one's just got water in it, and then give that a quick misting down. And I'll be putting my gouache paints on here, and it should keep them wet for longer, and then mix it on the glass bit at the bottom. So I'm going to move that out of the way now. It's taking up quite a bit of room. Obviously you wouldn't use this for plein air painting or anything like that, but I'll make a video of setting up a plein air palette at another point. So over to the gouache. I'm going to use the Artex Jelly Gouache today. And if you're having problems with your gouache, especially the jelly gouache, drying out, I do have a video on the channel about how to keep them like this. Yeah. So choosing colours, let's just plop some onto the palette. So I'm going to use it looks dirty, but it's actually clean palette knife. I'm just going to transfer some colours over onto here. Move the palette back out of the way. Can't get it all in view, but I can't really zoom in now. You're going to lose the palette as well. I'm not using a big brush. Just want to get some paint on this canvas and see how it reacts. This is a Crafter's Choice number 6 by Royal and Langnickel, and it's a filbert, meaning it's a flat but with a rounded end. Okay, so as with all watercolour mediums, I always tend to hold a piece of tissue in the left hand, and I'm going to be taking the paint, bringing it to the palette to mix, and then putting it on the canvas. Okay, so I'm going to zoom in just so, but you'll know what I'm doing. Let's have a look, zoom this in a bit. There you go. Ooh, that's looking strange, isn't it? Maybe better with zooming out just a little bit, because it is playing with the weave of the canvas a little bit. Once there's paint on here, then I'll go in again. So here we go with the best bit, the adding the paint to the canvas. So I've already shown you how to set up your palette if you'd like to work with gouache this way. It's so simple working this way when you're working in a studio setting, because the paints do stay wet a lot longer than they would if you were just taking them out of the pan and putting them in a normal palette. So I'm just applying some darks, and I thought I'd just speed this up and do a voiceover for this painting section, just to, well, speed things along a little bit, because you know there's no fun in watching paint dry. So I found the canvas cover of the sketchbook to be quite easy to work on. I don't know if it's been primed with anything, I didn't look into that, but as it's set up to be a suitable painting board surface, I should say. So it's taking the gouache very nicely, didn't have any problems with it at all. The tooth of the canvas is quite deep, so in some areas I did do a little bit of stippling to push the pigment right into the weave. But overall I was really happy with it, and I'm going to be ordering some more canvas covered sketchbooks and having a play with them, but with different mediums as well. So just going on with some lights now. If you've not worked with gouache before, it's a opaque watercolour. That's really all it is, an opaque watercolour. And you can mix glycerin in, things like that, to stop it from drying out so quickly. As I said, there is a video on my YouTube channel explaining how I keep the paints moist within the Artex palette, because they do have a tendency of drying out, but never mind. But this Arteza sketchbook will be going into my field bag, and I'll be taking it out and about. I don't know if you just saw that, but I just misted the paints and the paints on the sponge as well, and that's just with water. Just that's all there is in that little bottle, is just some distilled water. So I do that periodically throughout the painting process, keep spritzing the paints as I work. Now you could give the canvas that you're working on a light spritz of water as well, but I didn't want to do this on this case, being I've never worked on one of these sketchbook covers before. I didn't want to oversaturate it with moisture and then it take days and days and days to completely dry out. You can, to speed up the painting, if you do find your sketchbook cover getting too waterlogged, you can dry it out over a radiator, but just not on too hot. Now the colours here aren't looking true as such. I was having difficulty with my filming. Surprise, surprise. And I think it's because of that green mat underneath, because obviously you can see the finished sketchbook painting that I've put on screen, and the colours are very different. These colours that I'm putting on now were more beigey tones. Yeah, they were less yellowy as they're showing up, well, in actual fact they're showing up a little bit green on my monitor. I guess it's whatever monitor you're viewing on, but they were more of an earthy tone to them. But all I'm trying to do, I'm trying to get my lights and my darks in, then I'll go for the mid-tones, get them all in. Once that's dry, start glazing colours on top. Now you can glaze slightly with gouache. I know it has a tendency to lift off the paper or canvas, whatever surface you're working on, when you apply wet layers over the top. Now to avoid that, just work with a very gentle hand, very light hand, and very fine brush strokes. Don't try and scrub into paint, because it will lift, the layers underneath will lift away. So it's not a permanent fixture as such, but towards the end of the video I'll show you how you can protect your painting at the end, making it waterproof, and then it will last a long time. So speeding forward a little bit there, just cut out a tiny bit, adding some more coats. Sorry about my hair wafting into view again. So a little bit more going on, and it's just about building up the structure of the animal. Keep in mind the skeletal structure, the muscular structure of whatever animal or subject you're painting, and just keep that in mind as you're applying the coats of paint. What I did do is the image that I was actually working from, one of my own reference images, I blurred it out slightly, and the reason I did that to begin with is that I just wanted the blocks of colour, where the lights were, where the darks were, just to build up that form. I didn't want to get bogged down with any detail at this stage. In actual fact, using a canvas as a base and this small really prevented me from getting lots of detail in. So it's actually a freeing experience. It was really enjoyable. And obviously working on something this small, you can just turn it round on your work surface, not a problem at all, which was really nice as well. And it was just nice to have a break from working on bigger projects on my easel. Just a break, just made a change, and this is just for fun. This is just something for me. That colour looks so lemony in colour, and it really wasn't. It's a light beige. Now on the palette to the right, it is a tempered glass chopping board, and it has got quite a textured surface, which I found lovely to work from. What you could do if you don't like working on something clear where you can see what's underneath it, you can just pop a piece of white paper, a piece of white print paper will do underneath, and I do that later on in the video. So just going in, adding more darks, lights and mid-tones, and the colours actually blended really nicely. And if they didn't blend, if I was left with some hard lines somewhere that I didn't want, I simply dipped my brush into a little bit of distilled water and blended the edges out, and yeah, no problems at all, except working around the spine of the sketchbook. It wasn't problematic, it was just awkward. Didn't know how to hold it just to get into the creases. So obviously there's a crease running down either side of the spine where the actual book folds back on itself, and I just, yeah, juggling with the sketchbook just to get those areas filled in. But what an enjoyable process. I painted this over 2 days because I was busy doing other things. So I gave myself, an hour or so on day one to get it sketched out. Decide what I was going to paint and then sketch out what I'd decided. And then just to get the base coats on and get everything blocked in. And then that was sort of the end of the first day. It's looking very green, but I assure you it was more beige tones. And then I believe this is day 2, or this might be the remainder of day 1 because I actually blocked some of the background in as well. Okay, piece of white paper going underneath, and that didn't even help with the filming either, but there you go. It'll all be sorted out when I move into the new studio. I've just been working in there for the past half an hour, putting some more boarding up, so still waiting for the electrics to go in, but they will be going in hopefully soon. I'm just itching to get in there now. If anybody doesn't know, I'm renovating a garage into a studio, doing the work myself, but I'm just having to have somebody in to fit all the electrics, so that shows you how far I've got. False floor's gone down, the ceiling's gone in somewhat. All the walls are insulated now, the boards have gone up, I've done all that, and now just doing a few bits and bobs around the work area and waiting for the electrician to be able to pop round, which is a family friend, so I can't grumble because I know they're busy. Okay, so just blocking in some of the background, getting those darks in, and obviously with gouache it's opaque, so you can work light over dark, not a problem. And as I work my way down to the foreground on this side of the Rhino, I will be working dark to light, and you'll see that. So with gouache you can work light to dark, dark to light, both ways. Really enjoyable medium. Fast forward a little bit more. Oh, it just went on so nicely. But with me not having primed the surface underneath, when you hold the sketchbook itself and tip it backwards and forwards, as it catches the light, you can see that some of the weave has been missed with the paint, but that's fine. It's a sketchbook. It's not going to look like this forever. So in and out of a field bag. And hopefully once I get some sketches in there, I'll be sharing those with you as well. I might just keep this sketchbook just for sketching at Chester Zoo, I'm not sure yet. I say that and then it'll end up going to one of the bird reserves or something as well you watch. But I will do another one because I enjoyed this one so much. It was, yeah, really nice treat to sit back and chill. Sorry about my head going into frame. I obviously haven't learnt much since my last video where my wisps of hair were flitting backwards and forwards. But once in the new studio, there's going to be a lot more room. The lighting and the filming situation is going to be different as well. So hopefully it'll be better than it is now. But at least I'm getting some videos out there, and thank you for everybody who's subscribing and liking and sharing. Okay, I'm just going in with the Faber-Castell Sepia Fine Liner just to get a little bit of detail around the eye, because there seemed to be a lot going on in the rest of the Rhino and not a lot happening in the face, and I didn't want to add detail with the brush because I just get carried away. And I know it would end up too detailed, and it's just a sketchbook, it's just something for me. So I just wanted to give him a little bit of personality, get a little bit more texture in there, and I thought, yep, fine liners, great. These fine liners, I will put them in the description. They are water based, but they're water resistant, so once they're on there for good. So you can't wash them off or anything like that. They're light, fast and permanent. So just a few expressive lines, not too much. Obviously you can see the finished painting, and you can see that I didn't do an awful lot, just a little bit. And you can see nicely there on the right hand side how well the light greens have gone over the dark greens. So fill in a little bit more space. And just popping in some little lilac flowers. They weren't in the reference image, but I thought just add a little bit of colour to him. He's looking very green, isn't he? I'm sorry about that. But the photograph of the finished item is true to life. You can actually see the weave, the background on the right hand side, how it's just catching the light where the paint hadn't gone completely in. Okay, and we're back. It's the following day. Everything's really dried out, which it would be. Just wanted to make, with it being gouache dries quickly, but I just wanted to make sure the canvas underneath excuse me, had completely dried out. So now the next step now is, obviously we could leave it like that and it'd look nice on a shelf, but it's gouache, so it's water reactive, so we don't want it getting wet. This sketchbook is going to be thrown into the field bag to go out sketching with and things like that, so it will get damaged, so we need to protect it. And what we're going to do, we're going to wax it, and this is Talens wax medium. I'll pop it in the description. And all you do is take some out. Let's start on the back. I'll have to work my way around this little strap. Get a little bit of it. It has got petroleum in it, so you make sure you wash your hands after you've used. Make sure you're using clean hands as well. And you just start by applying some. Now you need to cover the whole area that's been painted, so along the edges as well. Quite a liberal coat of it, and when that's all covered I will leave it for 24 hours to cure, and then I'll take a lint free cloth at some point tomorrow and buff it, and then I'll show you when it's all finished. So you buff it just to get it to a sheen and take off the opacity, but as you can see it's not moving any of the gouache because this is wax based product, and obviously the gouache is water based product. Okay, so you just carry on going round, might take some time, and then that will be it, and it will be ready for use once this is cured. Okay, so just go around the whole painted area with the Talens wax, or any other wax medium, but this is my preferred one. And there you have him, just a little rhino in gouache on the cover of a sketchbook. The cotton canvas cover worked really well, it accepted the gouache brilliantly, I left the sketchbook for 24 hours. I was going to buff it to give it a sheen with a lint-free cloth, but it's still quite tacky in areas, so I'm going to leave it for another 24 hours, and I'll probably give it a rub over then, and it just gives it a little bit of an added sheen. Doesn't protect the cover any more than it already is. Now it's got the wax on, and then it will be good to go. Thank you for watching the video. I hope everyone's keeping safe, stay creative, and I'll be back soon with another video. Take care. Bye. Hi there my friends, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today I'm going to be reviewing some gouache paints sent to me by a company called Loxley Arts here in the UK. They contacted me a couple of months ago, asked me if I'd like to review their gouache, and I said yes. So I chose just 5 colours from them, as they come in quite big pots and I didn't want to seem greedy. So the pots of paint are 40mm, so quite big, and I just chose a limited palette: blue, red, raw ochre, black and titanium white. There were 25 different colours to choose from. Now obviously I've worked with gouache before, but I hadn't worked with the Loxley Arts Gouache before, so I didn't sample them or swatch them out or anything like that. Now if you've not worked with gouache before, I do recommend you swatch them out, because darks can dry a little bit lighter, lighter colours can dry a little bit darker, and if you're not used to that variable within the paint, it can be a bit tricky sometimes. But being I'd worked with gouache before, I was more than happy just to get this sketch sorted out and then crack on with the painting. Now if you want to know how I put my sketch onto this piece of watercolour paper, that is in another video that I'm releasing on the same day as this video, and it's a review of a light pad. So if you look for Elise UK light pad review, it's that video, and it'll just show you quickly how I get this drawing onto paper. Okay, so I'm working with the 5 gouache colours on a porcelain palette. If you've worked with gouache before, you'll know that the colours can be reconstituted with water. So that means if they dry on your palette, if they dry out completely, you can leave them for days. I did with these, and I just added a little drop of water with a pipette, and hey presto, your colours come back to life on your palette and you don't get any wastage, which is wonderful. Having said that, that can be a drawback, and that's why some people don't like gouache, because they can be reconstituted on your painting as well. So if you want to, you can lift earlier layers by adding water. Sometimes that's something that you want to do on purpose, and sometimes it happens when you don't want it to. However, what I find with gouache is I like to get a layer down and then hair dry it. So use a heating tool or a hairdryer. I use a hairdryer on sort of a medium setting, and then just really set the paint into the paper. You can still lift it with water, but it's less reactive that way, or that's how I've found. Now here you can see I've put just some dark black, some black with a little bit of blue mixed in, and a little bit of red, so it's got a bit of a purple hint to it. Can't get the words out today. And now I'm just applying some of the white with a little cotton wool bud. These are recyclable cotton wool buds. These stick in the middle, isn't plastic, it is paper. Thought I'd just let you know that. So what I'm doing here is I'm just testing the opacity of the white, and also see how well it can handle glazes, which is what I'll put on top of the white. So this piece for me, I'd already come up with the idea of this painting subject ages ago, but I didn't know what I wanted to paint it in. Then when Loxley Arts contacted me regarding gouache, 2 and 2 make 4 in my world, and this just seemed like the right project to create with these products. So so I found that the white went on beautifully throughout this video, throughout this project. the paints did exactly what I wanted them to do. They're amazing, they really are. They're a beautiful consistency. Each colour is consistent with the previous colour, as in, you know, the lifting tendencies, mixing tendencies, pigment intensity. Brilliant, all brilliant. Anyway, cracking on. So as you can see, I'm just glazing a little bit of a lighter purple over the white. Now with gouache, if I was to scrub this backwards and forwards with either that cotton wool bud or a brush, the layers will just lift. That is just part and parcel of working with gouache. But if you're very gentle, use a gentle hand, the previous layers can remain undisturbed, especially if you're hair drying them or heat setting them between each layer. Okay, so I was happy with the background. I just wanted an out of focus fuzzy background, and yeah, I was happy with that. So moving on to the foreground. A lot of illustrators used to like using gouache because of its properties, one of them being a matte finish, which is perfect if you want to photograph and make prints from your work. Not many gouache paints are 100% light fast, and the light fast rating that I could find on these Loxley Arts Gouache Paints was rated as good. Okay, so what I'll probably be doing, I have framed this painting. I've got it hanging on my wall. It's not in direct sunlight, it's just a well lit room. I'll watch how it how the colours change, if they do. I don't think they will, because the colours I chose are quite single pigmented anyway, so I can't see there being a problem, but I'll just keep an eye on it. But I will be making prints from this, and if anybody wants a print, just let me know in the comments below and I can point you in the right direction. Right, okay, I have written some notes down because I didn't want to forget anything, so I was writing notes down as I was working. Yep, all the colours can be reactivated on the painting if needed, and this was ideal later on when I wanted blurry lines. The cogs in the background, the edges of quite crisp of the metal cogs, but I wanted them to look at slightly out of focus around the edges. So what I did, I painted the cogs in normally, and then when everything was dry and heat set, I just took a small clean brush, a little bit of water on there, and just blurred out the edges, just mixed the edges of the background and the cogs together very, very delicately, which shows that even after heat setting and even after being left for a couple of days, the colours can be reactivated. And as I said, some people like that in gouache, some people stay clear of gouache because of that. Yeah. Everybody's different, everybody's art style and preferences of mediums is different, and I just like working with everything. So, and I love gouache. I wanted to test out working light over dark, working dark over light. So if you're used to watercolours, you'll know that you work from light to dark. You can do that with gouache. If you like working in acrylics and oils, you can work dark to light. You can do that with gouache. So it's a very, very pliable medium. It'll do exactly what you want it to do without really many surprises, to be quite honest. So here you can see I've finished, well, more or less finished the foreground, working dark to light. Just a little bit of pointillism going on there. On the cog, I'm just adding water. I'm using deionized water, the sort of water you buy for car batteries. So it's it's very pure. There's no impurities in it. And I've watered the gouache down to the consistency of a watercolour. And I just want to see how strong the pigment is and how well it moves across the wet paper. Wet in wet technique. The reason I'm trying it on this cog in the background is because it's a wet in wet technique that I want to use on the Gecko. So why not try it out first on the cog in the background. Lifting a little bit of the dark paint out there with a wet brush so it lifts. Obviously not straight back to white paper because black is staining the paper. When something stains the paper, the the pigment particles are very small and they sink right into the tooth of the paper, so they're quite stubborn. That's why you can't lift some colours out, because they've actually right down into the tooth of the paper, where others sort of bigger pigment particles sit about on the top, and you can lift them quite easily, and if you're quick enough they won't stain the paper too much. And sometimes you can get back to near enough white. It all depends on the colour you're using and the pigment that's been used to make that colour, and how finely that pigment has been ground down. Okay, a little bit more wet into wet. That paper's still damp. As I said before, between each layer, I've not filmed it, but I actually go over the paper and really dry it well with a hairdryer. Then when I turn the hairdryer off, give the paper a couple of minutes to cool back down before I'm working on top of it again. So switch round to another angle now. Little bit of stippling. So paint's the paper's completely dry now. The paint is sort of a medium consistency now. Not too runny, because I don't want it running everywhere. And not too runny, I don't want my paper to start cockling either. The paper I'm using is a sheet of Arches cold press, £140 watercolour paper, and I've torn it from a block, a pre-stretched Arches block. It's a beautiful paper. Oh, another good thing about gouache, if you're into mixed media, working with different mediums on the same painting, gouache creates a texture, a tooth, all of its own. So even if you're going on to really smooth paper and you paint on with gouache, when it's dry it becomes textured. There's a slight toothiness to it, a little bit like a very fine sandpaper. So then on top of that you could go on with dry mediums such as oil pencils or wax-based pencils or pastels, for instance, and because they're all dry mediums they won't lift the layers underneath. Just an idea if you want to work in mixed mediums. So here I've done a little bit of glazing, and in the next clip the page is actually turned round, so you will see the depth of colour. The pigment in this colour was amazing. It really is full of pigment, very vibrant pigments as well. Obviously you can tone those down with your mixing, but yeah, look at that, that's looking lovely. Okay, so building up a little bit of wet on wet, wet on dry here for this cog, and really I'm just playing with the paint, seeing what it can do for me. It is a paint that I will be using again. It's yeah, beautiful. Nothing, yeah, no down thumbs at all thumbs up for these Loxley Arts Gouache paints. Now you can see letting it run back into that black, giving all of this cog a little bit more texture. I did choose the cold press paper because it is a textured paper. I did have a play with the gouache paints on a little scrap of hot press smooth paper. Wasn't going to be ideal for this project. And you don't know till you try, and I didn't want to get this far and then realise I wish I'd have gone with a textured paper, so hence trying it out first on a little scrap. Sort of a 2" by 2" scrap piece of paper is enough to give you an idea of whether a piece of paper is going to work for your project or not. If there's any art materials you'd like me to review, please let me know. Just add it in the comments below. I've been doing quite a few commissioned work, and I've had a recent exhibition which has taken up time, so now back to filming again. It's lovely. I do have another review lined up to be filmed, but I haven't started that one yet. But if there's any subjects or mediums you'd like to see me cover, just let me know and I'll add them to my to-do list. I hope everybody's keeping well and keeping safe and keeping creative. Have any of you worked with gouache before? And if so, just let me know in the comments, what did you create and which brand did you like to use. It's really interesting to find out. I do have some Paul Rubens wax pastel crayons that I need to review, but I'll be doing them soon. Okay, what else did we use? Right, the brushes I'm using are Talens. So the Talens bristle brushes I used in this painting, a little bit firmer. I'm not that keen on using my watercolour brushes when I'm experimenting with gouache, because I didn't know the consistency of this gouache. I didn't want to use my best watercolour brushes because they're a little bit soft, and when you're pushing around large quantities of paint on your palette, it can be a bit of a hard work for a delicate watercolour brush. But these brushes, they're fine. I used some by Daler Rowney and some by Royal Langnickel, so all golden Talens bristle brushes. They're vegan, no animals were harmed in the making of these brushes, completely synthetic. I'm just looking down my notes to make sure I'm not missing anything. No, I think I've mentioned everything. So just building up the texture a little bit at a time. I am working from photographs, so I do keep stopping and looking. I don't print anything out. I don't print any reference images out. I've said it in videos before, but I have been asked a couple of times. No, I just take photos or use copyright free photos or photos that have been gifted to me, and I just work from those on my iPad normally or on a display monitor, either way. But I very, very rarely, if ever, print any images out, for the simple reason is you need a really, really good printer to get a decent quality colour that matches what you actually want, and also the inks and everything, it's not good for the environment, so I don't print them out. So I sketch from my iPad or from Life or from a display monitor, and then I paint from those as well. So the only thing I would print out are black and white sketches. If I've done a digital sketch and I need the sketch printing out, as I did for this, so I could transfer it over onto the watercolour paper, that's the only thing I print out, just in black and white. And then it gets filed away because it will possibly be used again. Okay, moving on. So a little bit of wet on dry going on to this. And it's really rinse and repeat. It's the same, the same, the same. As you can see, some of the background did go onto the edge of the cog, but that's fine because these colours are very opaque and I can build up layers just covering those marks over. And as I said in the beginning of the video, I do end up going around the edges of the cogs a day or so after finishing the painting and blending the background and the edge of the cog together to give it a blurry, out of focus feel. So while the paper's still a little bit damp, just adding a little bit more colour and texture to the edge of this cog. And the other cog will be worked exactly the same. A little bit more colour, and it's absolutely amazing really. I mean, 5 colours, 2 of those titanium white and black, and the variety of colour you can mix is amazing. And I think some people, they won't give it a try, and that's a shame if you don't want to try and mix your own colours. I mean, sometimes, yeah, when you're learning, you do end up with sort of mud more times than not, but it's a learning curve, and when you do achieve a colour mix that you really like, it's a wonderful feeling. It's an achievement, another pat on the back. So that white is beautifully opaque, isn't it? It's the highlights going onto there, beautiful, just what I wanted. Okay, so the other cog is now in as well, so it was done exactly the same as the previous cog. Now onto the Gecko. So working wet on wet, I'd already gone on with some water and then just dropping the colour in. And the gouache I'd really watered down in the palette. Now it's watered down like you would watercolour, so still quite opaque though, but translucent enough for the white of the paper to show through. So using it more like a watercolour than anything else now. So more water going on there, ready to drop in some colour. And obviously the more you water down a product, the less light fast it is, because obviously the particles are spread further apart, so they've got less protection. So that's something to keep in mind as well. But as I said, most artists in the past, when using gouache, were using it for illustrative work, animation work, so the images would be reproduced. So it didn't really matter how light fast or not the originals were. I'm hoping that the light fast in these paints is really good, because they are single pigments, so there shouldn't be a problem at all. But I'll be selling prints of this, and I've got the original hanging on my wall, framed. A little bit more going into that wet on wet, and then I can build gradually up the other layers going onto the top of this as soon as it's dry. Don't forget, every layer I put on, I do dry it with the hairdryer, just so it's set into the paper and there's less likelihood of it lifting if I don't want it to. With gouache also, if you've got a very light hand, you can actually do your whole painting in shades of grey, monotone painting, get all your shadows in, leave all your highlights showing, and then if you heat set it, and then you can go on with your colours and glaze it. As long as you use light hand and very soft brush strokes, it can be achieved quite easily. Nothing to be afraid of at all. I want to say a huge thank you to all the people who have been liking and watching my videos, and to all my new subscribers, that's lovely, and to all my existing subscribers, thanks so much. It's you're all a blessing. Thank you for the people that have been following me on the different social media platforms, that's lovely, and the feedback regarding the videos is brilliant, thank you. If you haven't already liked this video and you're enjoying this one, then please hit the like button, and if you haven't subscribed, then please hit the subscribe button as well, because that really helps my algorithms, and it puts my videos in front of people who might enjoy them too. So that's lovely. So yeah, like, subscribe, and shares. If you know anybody that'd be interested in my videos, then please feel free to share them on social media. That's brilliant. Thank you very much. Okay, so we're going on wet on dry now. So nice wet paint, consistency of watercolour now, onto dry paper that's been dried with the hairdryer. I just picked up a very cheap hairdryer from a local superstore. It's sort of a £5, £6 hairdryer, and it just hangs next to my drawing board and does the job. You don't need anything fancy. You don't need expensive heat tools and things like that for working with acrylics, watercolours and gouache. If you just want to dry your painting quickly, then a cheap bog standard hairdryer will do the trick. Okay, more of the same, getting a little bit of variation in the tone in those little spots, so they're not all the same darkness all the way across these little head and body. Just yeah, little bit of variance there. And now a little bit of pointillism, just putting some colour in with little dots, just building up the texture now. It's the same idea, same formulation, I guess, as I used for the sand. So just building up the texture of the skin, just with little dots of paint. And I do end up going between darks and lights, just working over and over again the same areas, but still hopefully letting the white of the paper show through. And this paper isn't stark white, but it's white enough. It's not a brilliant white, it's more of a natural white, which goes nice with a natural subject. And there he is, finished. I didn't film it all because you would have been asleep by the end of this video. Thank you for watching. I hope you've enjoyed watching this little gecko come to life. I enjoyed creating him. If you have any questions, please pop them in the comments below. Please hit like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. And let me know what you think of gouache paints. Have you used them before? Have you worked with different subjects in gouache, and which do you prefer? Any comments below, I always read them, I always reply. It's lovely to get a sort of a community feeling going, and I'll leave it at that for now. So if you haven't, check out the other video regarding the light pad review that enabled me to get the initial sketch onto this piece of watercolour paper. And stay safe, people, stay creative. Thank you so much for your ongoing love and comments and support. It's all really, really appreciated. Stay safe, stay creative, and I'll see you all soon. Bye for now. Bye-bye.